All right, welcome everybody to the 4th edition of the Professionally Evil Lunch and Learn. My name is Nathan Sweaney. I'm one of the senior consultants for Secure Ideas. This webcast series is an idea I had several months back just to do something a little bit more fun during the lunch period. We know there's a lot of marketing-driven webcasts out there, a lot of people trying to get your eyes and your money. So we just wanted to do something a little bit more relaxed, more fun. We wanted to get some smart security people in a room, and then I can ask them questions. And we just talk about security, various topics, that sort of thing. No slides other than the one that's up, just kind of some, people are always asking where we're going to be. So those are some upcoming events where our consultants will be at. If you happen to be at one of those events, we'd love to see you come by our booth and get some stickers and that sort of thing. If you're collecting, if we don't have a booth, look for us anyway. We'll be speaking or something. I think like at Circle City Con, Mike's teaching a class and Kate does everything else. I don't know for sure what she does there, but yeah. So anyways, we're just gonna ramble for an hour. If you're collecting CPEs, worst case, you at least get a CPE for the hour that you listen. But other than that, we'll go ahead and get started. Some housekeeping stuff. I know we've already been asked a few times. Yes, this is being recorded, and we'll upload it to our YouTube channel when we're done. It usually takes us a couple of days to process the video and all that, and take out all the stupid stuff. That's not true. We really don't take stupid stuff out. You're removing me? But with that said, if you want to go back and view other ones, previous months, you can go back. We've had some really good conversations on passwords and on security conferences and stuff like that. So additionally, we would love to have your participation. There's two ways that you can do that. One is obviously through the chat channel, chat box down here on the bottom right. Honestly, that's kind of hard for us to keep up with. We'll try. The other option is to go to the Professionally Evil Slack team. If you already have Slack, it's a great way to join. I just posted a link in there. Click that link. Trust me, it's safe. And it'll it'll give you a free invite to our Slack team. When you join, look for the pound L to join the channel. And we'd appreciate comments and feedback and questions and anything else you have in there. With that said, the recording includes the feed and the scroll of that chat box. So 1, don't post anything in there you don't want public. And 2, don't post anything that makes me ban you forever, because then I have to go back and white it out, and I don't like doing that. All right. With that said, famous last words, exactly. With that said, let me introduce our panelists for today. In the middle, we have Kevin Johnson, CEO of Secure Ideas, hacker extraordinaire, hacker princess, you may know him by, professional speaker, one-time contributor to Wireshark. I think his name is still listed on the Oh, damn. Mike says that's not the middle for everybody. So if that's not the middle for you, he's the other guy waving right now. On the other side, it's on the far right for me, but wherever you guys happen to be, we have Johnathan Kimmett. He's the Chief Information Security Officer for the University of Tulsa, where he's been for 17 years, I believe. Yep. Johnathan also serves with me on the board of our local ISSA chapter. And as far as I can tell, Johnathan's not on social media at all outside of LinkedIn. I tried to do some research and I found LinkedIn, and that's pretty much it. So he's one of those guys.
Yeah, I try to stay away from it.
Probably a good call. So with that said, as we mentioned, this is a lunch and learn. So hopefully everybody's getting a chance to eat lunch. If you're on the West Coast, sorry, call it brunch, whatever. But feel free to jump in there in Slack and tell us what you're eating, and we can all be jealous. But let's get started. So today we're going to talk about GDPR. We're going to talk about privacy. We're going to talk about some various other regulations and effects on privacy and technology and all those types of things. There's really nothing off the table. We've got some general conversation starters, but then we're just going to see where it goes. So I thought maybe as a way to get started, and Johnathan, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Can you give us just a really high level, like 30-second summary of what GDPR is and why it's important?
Yeah, GDPR is actually two different things for us. I'll tell you what it specifically is. It is an attempt to standardize across the EU nation or the EU member states their data privacy laws. So they've had the data protection directive that was distributed out. Everyone kind of had their own version of it, the various member states. And it was an opportunity for people to kind of do their own thing. The GDPR was an attempt, or is a standardization across the board of all of those data privacy laws. So at the moment, GDPR is the data protection regulation for the EU member states. The other piece of that is, what is it? And that is it is a defining regulation that data privacy or data subject privacy is a default right. It is their right to have privacy with their information, and the data subjects themselves control their information. So, there's a lot of pieces to it, but that's kind of the gist of it, the kind of the overview. Whereas in the United States, we look at data as being owned by the controller or the processor. In the EU, they want it to be that the data subject themselves have the law behind them to decide what happens to their data.
Okay. So what makes this regulation different than past regulations or other types of privacy regulations?
Well, so in the EU, from my understanding, it's really no different than what they've been doing for the last 30 years. If you look at Convention 108, kind of started the data privacy intent in the EU and kind of progressed on through down to the General Data Protection Directive, and then now to the GDPR. In the United States, it's very different. We do data privacy by secretarial, or basically by the industry, HIPAA, FERPA, COPA, GLBA, things like that. Whereas in the EU, they do it kind of more of a national level.
Huh. I hadn't thought about that difference of by industry versus nationwide.
Yeah, if you look at HIPAA, FERPA, COPA, pick your acronyms. They all have pieces that are similar to the GDPR. They have things about the right to have your records be correct, the right to know where your records are at, in various forms. And we have it across the board, and even in the state legislatures, we have laws in place, whether it's data breach laws, or ISP laws, data collection laws, spam laws, things like that. We already have those bits and pieces kind of spread out. What the EU does is they just say, okay, this is standard. We're going to say across the board, everyone gets these rights across all the industries. Okay.
As there at TU, I know you guys have a lot of international students. What kind of effect has the GDPR had on you guys?
It's going to have a big effect on us, and that's kind of why I got into it about a year and a half ago now, is looking to see how our students are going to be affected, how our faculty and staff, how our employees, how our alumni, and how our contractors are going to be affected. Because we have alumni, or we have EU residents in all of those categories. So we have to think about how we handle data, where we send data, what we're going to do with the data to make sure that we're falling under the guidelines of GDPR.
Nice. Kevin, what about secure ideas? Like, have we had to deal with GDPR stuff? Is there anything that we have to be worried about?
Well, I'm sure there's lots of things we have to be worried about. For example, contractually with some of our customers, they're concerned about GDPR from their perspective. We're about to do a pen test and steal data from them. That data has, GDPR relevance. I'm not a lawyer. Only 2 of my Facebook profiles pretend to be. So I'm not even going to attempt to say where we should be legally on it, right? We have our lawyers looking at what we need to do. We don't do a lot of stuff, almost no stuff, in Europe itself. And so far, what I've been told by people, and I want to be very clear, this is not advice because I have no idea if I'm being told the right things, that for the way we do business, most of our liabilities and requirements fall into from our customer to us, not our data particularly. We don't collect data on people. We don't, you know what I mean? So, like I said, I could be totally wrong, but that's my understanding.
That's my understanding as well, is that unless you are intentionally trying to target European citizens, or unless you're doing something that could target European citizens, that you don't actually apply. Am I right on that, Johnathan, or is that different?
I'm going to say the same thing. I'm not a lawyer. I can tell you what I recommend to the university as part of my position here. And what I encourage people to do, number one is, of course, go talk to their lawyers. But number two, as the current reading is on the GDPR, and it's going to change because it's all going to change based off the enforcements. What I tell people to do is, if they have any EU resident information within their systems in any way, they need to at least ask some questions. Sure. Ask their lawyers, go find a DPO, whether it be contract or if their company is going to have a DPO, they need to, get someone that they ask the questions. Now, I'll tell you that one of the things that, I think GDPR does pretty well is they do make the delineation between PII, sensitive PII, and public. So, we do get, it's not just the fact that we have PII available, in our systems. If that information is public information, let's say you have their business card or you have their public profile on the internet, that's public information. You don't have to do much with it any different than you otherwise handle your data.
I just lost sound.
No, we can still hear you.
Okay, you're fine then, go ahead.
But when you start doing things such as collecting PII that's not public, sensitive PII, those bits and pieces, that's when you start getting, where you have to think about it differently. The GDPR wants you to think about it differently.
Sure. Somebody, Scott mentioned in Slack that where do you say it? Your local IP address is considered PII under GDPR. I've heard that. I've heard that applied. Talk about that.
So we don't know how it's going to be enforced, but generally any indirect information that can be used to identify someone's or someone's actions and a decision can be made off of that is considered PII. So whether it's your IP address, whether it's any other type of logs, maybe card access logs, video camera logs, surveillance logs, anything like that, that someone can look at and make a decision on that, hey, that is you, that falls under, that could possibly fall under GDPR scope.
But it depends on how it's enforced, right? And
there's two parts of that, if I may, that are the concern. One is how it's enforced, right, which we don't know yet, right? Because as all the spam we've got coming into us is telling us, we do still have a couple of days. The other thing is that idea of that could be tied to the person, right? The question I've had, and I've not been able to find anybody who can give me a consistent answer, and I believe it's because of the first problem we've said, is that how far do you take that, right? And I think back to, what was it, 87 years ago when AOL still mattered, and they released that anonymized data, and those people went in and were able to de-anonymize the data, right? That's, okay, well, where under GDPR would that fall under? And I do believe, just from my own perspective, that with how trivially that was de-anonymized, it would absolutely fall. But what about my address right here on this machine is 10.42.10.23. And yes, Nathan, I just revealed an internal IP address.
So this is going to go on YouTube, and some future find this.
Some future pen tester. Look, 2 years ago we had an asshole pen tester send me a picture of me with my wife and kid in front of my house as personal identifiable information that was leaked about the company. My IP address is 10.42.10.23. Yes, it actually is. And if we used a proxy server to get to the internet, that would log that 10.42.23.10, I screwed that up, but whatever, is 173. Whatever our external IP address, which would then tell the Apache server at the other end, right? You have to go through two entities to track it all the way back to me.
Right.
Is that too far enough, right? Like, and that's why I say is I think that the first question has to be answered before we can answer the second question. But
yeah, I would agree with that, except for the fact of there's bits and pieces of the GDPR that you got to take into effect. It's, you know, your IP address, whether it be your local IP, in and itself may not be an identifying marker for you. However, let's say your proxy server that maintains those logs and keeps all that information of what you did, how you did it, you know, got compromised, and that information got released, then that could fall under the PII that you have to go into breach notification on.
Right.
So I think that, you know, I know watching on Slack, people are talking about the, you know, IP address, you know, doing IP addresses, you know, is, I think one of them said, insane. And it probably is if you're just thinking about it as, you know, my computer is sitting here, it's on the network, and, you know, who cares? But then again, let's look at it from the point of view of, I've got IP addresses that are accessing my Exchange server, and that is being, you know, you correspond that with maybe a DNS request, and those two servers got compromised on my network, and I can start tracking, you know, this person got this email, so I know who it is. They also were asking, you know, they were going to Ashley Madison, or they were going to some other website that, you know, they're embarrassed about. That becomes PII at that point. I would believe that, you know, from the perspective of the university, we would consider that PII, and we would, you know, initiate our breach response program.
Well, and for me, this is one of the biggest problems with things like GDPR and what have you, is that because the penalties are so high, and the prescriptions are so light, right? Companies are going to fall on the side of being as safe as possible. And Nathan and I were talking about this the other day, and I think a really good example of this is California and their cancer-causing agent labels, right? A number of, and Nathan, no, because we and I talked about this, right? California came out, and I'm not going to get into politics or opinions or anything else like that. I mean, I can make fun of California with the best of them, but they came out with a law that said, if you are a business owner, a building owner, whatever, and you have a storage closet that has chemicals that are known to cause cancer in California, which I love that phrasing because it sounds like they only cause cancer in California.
Why don't they tell the other states?
I know, but it's so unreasonable. But that you have to label a closet to warn employees and customers and staff that going in there may expose them to something. And the penalties were so high for it, and the description of what you had to do was so light, that what companies ended up doing is if you go to California and walk around, the building itself, as you go in the front door, has a sign that says, this building contains chemicals known to cause cancer. So what we have is a law that, for all intents and purposes, was done for a good reason, right? We want to help people, we want to protect people, which is exactly what GDPR is trying to do. Let's protect privacy because somehow privacy is a right, which I think is BS, but that's a different conversation. That we want to protect people, but really all we did was enrich sign builders, right? Because all the sign makers made a lot of money. No person is actually safer because they still don't know what closet and storage unit and whatever have cancer-causing things. And we've already seen that with GDPR. Every spam I get, we've updated our privacy policy. I read through the privacy policy. All their privacy policy does is say, hey guys, we're collecting this data.
How many people are actually reading through those? I mean, I get a couple of those every day. You read through all of them? Everyone you've gotten?
I will not claim everyone because I am not sure, but I have attempted to read every notification I've gotten.
Wow. I don't even, when I see the word privacy in an email now, I just...
Well, I'll be very clear with what I said. I said the notification. I have not attempted to read every single one of those privacy policies.
Oh, okay. So you at least read the email. You're making the marketing folks happy.
Yeah, they can track me.
Verifying your email address is still good in their marketing system. So here's the thought that I've had, and I deal a lot with PCI, and PCI is considerably different than most of the other regulations in the U.S. because it's contractual based, and I don't want to get into PCI in this call. There's a lot of history there of why it is.
Next month.
Next month, maybe it will be. Let's see. But so the idea is that with HIPAA and SOX and GLBA and all these others, if there are violations, if there are issues, now it's a government entity trying to do enforcement via because of a complaint, something like that. And what ends up happening is that the government-based regulations, the laws, tend to be much more vague, and then they refine them based on case law as things happen, as opposed to PCI that came out and it was like extremely specific and detailed. And it still has flaws, but I see GDPR more on that. It's a regulation, obviously, right? So I don't think we're really going to know how some of these things fall out until a year down the road when people start getting sued and have deal with big fines. And I don't know. What do you think?
So I would caution here's the thing about GDPR. There's going to be a couple of factors of enforcement here. There's going to be that the EU is going to try to enforce this. Or they're going to enforce. I want to say they're going to try. They're going to enforce it. And they're going to enforce it for the member states. And anyone who does business in the EU is going to fall under whichever DPA they're going to be at. But even further than that, I think there's going to be a couple of issues here. Number one, the way they wrote it in terms of controllers and processors. If you are a data controller, you have to, in the contracts, define how your data processor is going to use your data. So, it's going to come down to where, if you guys saw the PayPal breakdown of all of their data processors, kind of down the line, each one of those processors by GDPR is going to have to meet the requirements of GDPR for that of PayPal. So all those little sub breakdowns of the chart are now going to be contractually obligated to meet the requirements of GDPR. So some of those people are just going to get it because that's how they get it. Other people are going to get it because, I fully expect that because of the FTC and the fact that we're part of GPAN, they're going to enforce the GDPR through the FTC. At least they're going to investigate it. And or possibly even just mandate that anybody who gets public contracts, from the government, grants, money, whatever, they're going to have to meet the GDPR. So now you're taking your, every organization that otherwise it's 20 million euros is what the whichever is bigger. But so if the government says anybody who's a government contractor is going to have to fall under GDPR. Anybody that has a contract with a controller that has to fall under GDPR is going to have to fall under GDPR. Now you're going to start spreading it out. It's not even the fact that the DPAs are enforcing it or the EU is forcing it. It's the fact that the contracts you're going to sign with these organizations are going to enforce it. And I've got firsthand, knowledge of that with Graham-Leach-Bliley. By the university's stake, we decided we didn't meet Graham-Leach-Bliley back 8 years ago. Then someone came up and told me that, hey, we signed an agreement with the DOE that we were going to meet Graham-Leach-Bliley. So we had 6 months to fully comply with Graham-Leach and show all that information. When I went and asked our controller about it, he says, no, we don't fall under that. I was like, okay, well then we're done. When I went to the department that signed the contract, they go, oh, you signed a contract binding the university to this, therefore we have to do it. So, I think that's how it's going to play out. And a lot of these organizations are going to do it because they want to sign the contract with the PayPal, and PayPal is going to do it because they have a presence in the EU.
And every consumer is harmed.
Yeah. So
every consumer is affected.
I would claim harmed.
Potato. In Slack, there's some discussions about the ranges of penalties. And the big numbers are what everybody's advertising. I know there's some smaller ones for smaller companies. I don't know the details of how that is, but one of the things that I've heard kind of behind the scenes happening, I mentioned, Johnathan, this to you the other day. So there's been a lot of movement, my understanding, on the political side with some of the big banks that do business in Europe, which is pretty much any big bank, and that the EU is leaning on them to basically push down fines, or at least basically cut off companies that refuse to pay fines. So you might say, well, hey, I'm in some country that's not going to be enforced. I don't have to deal with this, whatever. And that's fine. And then your bank says, well, we can no longer do business with you because you violate this contract. And so you think, well, I'll just go do business with a small local bank. Well, that bank has shareholders and is owned by some other bank that, you know, there's all these relationships and contractual stuff. And so pretty soon, if this bank doesn't, it's kind of like the way they do PCI, where they make the acquiring banks enforce the restrictions down the chain. Basically, if your bank refuses to do business the way they say, you know, it's almost an extortion thing where you won't do it. So it's curious. I don't know how much that'll play out, but I don't know. I want to move. We're getting into details. I don't want to get bogged down because there's lots of blogs that people can read about stuff like this. But
and you'll probably get spam from some vendor who will tell you. If you haven't already received it, you will. And if you don't, just ask. I'll forward you some of the ones I've gotten.
There you go. So Scott asked, "Is privacy dead?" And I want to skip over that because we are going to come back to it. But I'm curious about this concept of the right to be forgotten, right? So the GDPR has this idea that, GDPR basically says that if I'm a user and you have my data, I can file something and you have to forget about me. You have to lose my data.
Right. It's the right to erasure.
Right to erasure. Is that a good idea? I mean, let's forget about GDPR. Let's forget about regulations. Just in terms of what's good for society, is that a good idea for privacy?
No.
Yes.
All right. We got some disagreement.
Well, okay, wait a minute. I may agree that it is a good idea for privacy. I don't agree that privacy is a good thing.
See, I'm on the other side. I think privacy is a good thing because I don't want my information or my family's information out there under control that I don't have.
I like that in theory, right? I believe that from a perspective of I don't want my family's data. I have two daughters, Brenda and Sarah. I love them to death. Brenda's identity has already been stolen, right?
Yeah.
Her social security number's on Google. Her data was taken. Her medical records were taken. Everything else. I think that this idea that we have the right to be erased is giving everybody a false sense of security that's just going to bite us in the rear in the future. Yep. Because the theory that I could say to a company, just one company, hey, erase everything you have about me and get rid of it, and they can guarantee that they did, is bogus. There is no way that any mediocrely complex organization can guarantee that they've removed all the data. And a good example of this from my experience, I worked at Blue Cross of Florida. I left Blue Cross of Florida and I went to a consulting firm in Guardians, and I worked there for a few years, and I got tired of travel and I took a job at Bank of America. And when I took the job at Bank of America, I know, right? I got tired of travel. I travel more now. Jerk. And, but when I took the job at Bank of America, I went to sign up for my 401k. And I will admit right now, publicly, being recorded on YouTube, I suck at financial planning. I never signed up for a 401k until I got to Bank of America. And I will be honest, I literally thought to myself, oh my gosh, I'm a vice president at a bank. I probably should have a 401k. So I went to sign up, and I couldn't register as a new user at Merrill Lynch. Obviously the 401k provider at Bank of America, since they own Merrill Lynch. And when I dug into it and finally got on somebody on support, it's because I already had an account. And the reason I had an account was when I was at Blue Cross, they had provided all their employee data to Merrill Lynch because that's where they offered their 401k through. I am sure that at some point I found out that that was there, but I didn't know. And I even reached out to the HR group at Blue Cross and talked to somebody, and their answer was, no, your data only goes over to Merrill Lynch. Now they're wrong, let's be clear. Your data only goes to Merrill Lynch if you sign up for the account. And it's like, no, it's it's there, right? And so this idea that we have this right to be forgotten, okay, I won't argue the rights thing. I've already said I disagree with it, but it's just a CYA for the companies. They can't actually do it. And so what's going to happen is there's going to be breach notification, breach notification, breach notification. Everybody's going to find people. People are going to be like, this is awful. And people are still going to rant about privacy and not have any. Sorry, I know that's a bit of a rant.
Well, I would agree with that, and I think that there's personally what I would like to see is devalue the information. I would like to see release everyone's social security number across the board.
Yep.
The Social Security Administration says don't use social security numbers as a primary identifier, flat out. So let's just release them all. That way, nobody can use it as a unique identifier.
Yep. I'm cool with that.
I'd give you mine, but I don't want everybody to know my garage door code.
I know your garage door code.
The other part of it is, what we're talking about is what is the harm? When we talk about information PI, what is the harm that they would have on this? If you take away that harm, then the privacy, who cares? You can have my social security number, you can have my date of birth, you can have this, you can have that. If there's no harm you can do to me, in that case,
yes.
Then, so here's an example. What I'd like to see personally is, let's say someone goes and fills out a mortgage application or a credit card or something in my name with my information. And that credit card comes up to me and says, we want our money. Oh, sorry, that wasn't me. You can't prove that was me. Well, we have your social security number. That's not an identifier. So if that's the case, then that organization has to come up with a way to identify the person they're dealing with and how they're going to continue to identify them. And it's not going to be me or my kids or, anything else. So if we can remove the harm, then, okay, that's great. Privacy, I look at privacy as a way to harm my children. If I'm going to try to protect them until they can become adults, I'm trying to protect them from any harm. Like what you said earlier, as your daughter has already had her identity stolen. I've had my identity lost in OPM and Equifax and various other things, and there's nothing I can do. I had my fingerprints, my bio, my family, my friends, everything was lost. So for me, I look at it, all right, what do I need to do to protect my kids? Now, here at the university, I kind of see it a little bit differently because my job is to protect all of my students. I hammer on my departments saying, we're not going to do this piece, and this piece because I can't secure that. I'm not going to let you send a spreadsheet in your email to this other organization that has social security numbers in it, because there's no way in our environment that I can secure that and make sure that it gets from point A to point B in a secure fashion and no one can take it. So I'm taking GDPR very seriously here at the university because I'm using it as a tool to change the culture here. Yeah. And I think that that's kind of the intent of the GDPR, is to help people change the culture in their organizations, to say, okay, let's not have this data. I think I used this story in the ISSA meeting where I talked to a department a month ago or 2 months ago, and they were complaining. I told them, you can't have date of birth in whatever they were doing. So we have to have it. No, you don't. You do not need to have date of birth. Yes, we absolutely have to have it. Why do you have to have it? We have to know how old they are. No, you don't. You need to know if they're over 18. You need to know if they're over 21. Those are two fields in their record that's a checkbox.
Yep.
You don't need to have that piece of information. Why? Because other parts of campus use unfortunately, they use their date of birth as a primary identifier when they're, coming in to do something. So again, if we can get rid of that, where we don't use that part, then I don't care about the date of birth.
I agree with everything you said except for one thing. I would argue your job is not to protect your students. Your job is to protect the organization and the data about the students. And the reason I think that that's an important differentiator is I don't believe that your organization should, maybe you are, I doubt it, but are going out to sites and systems and organizations outside of the university that contain your students' data to protect their data there. So if you, like, for example, I don't think you guys are going out to Pastebin to look up dumps that may include students' information. That isn't the data you have. And the reason I say that that's an important differentiator is I believe that it is critical that individuals understand that no matter what regulations we pass, no matter what organizations do to say they're going to protect us, we have a personal responsibility to control and protect our own data. And I'm not saying you're wrong.
Sure.
I'm just saying we should frame it differently, because the minute we say that, and I apologize, I'm going to totally screw this up. Was it the University of Tulsa?
Yes.
Okay.
University of
Okay.
Tulsa.
I didn't screw it up. I'm like thinking, wait a minute, was that right? That if people take the idea that the University of Tulsa's ISO is going to protect their students,
Right.
then they remove all
Absolutely.
responsibility. And I think a good example of that is Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, right? We had this uproar about, oh my God, this company abused our data. And when they started saying that, I'm like, yes, you're right. Facebook has been abusing your data for years. Like, no, not Facebook. It was Cambridge Analytica. There was a breach, and there was no breach. The API provided the data that you gave them.
Right.
And we've removed personal responsibility. It's a pet peeve of mine that we allow people to say they don't have personal responsibility because the company screwed them. Sorry.
And absolutely, I agree 100% with that. And I'll rephrase the way I believe that. It's my job to protect the data that I have in our systems.
Yes, absolutely.
And the actions of our employees and students within our systems. My job is to put at least as much as reasonable we can do the protections in place that they're not going to do anything that
I lost sound.
Is dumb. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, Kevin. Where'd he go? Can
we still hear it?
Kevin?
Okay, I can't hear anything being said to me, but I can hear.
What?
Wonderful.
We can hear you just fine. That's hilarious. How can you not hear what's being said to you?
Okay. I got it back.
Can you hear me now? Okay. So I want to pivot off that conversation. Maybe by the next webinar, Kevin can upgrade from the DSL modem he's got in the office. Or just burn it down.
When we move the office, we'll get off of dial-up.
For those who don't know, we just got notified that our office building is being demolished, and so we have to move the Jacksonville office. So,
Wow.
But back to the conversation of, an example at TU. Let's imagine a fictitious situation where you're harvesting data about students, and somebody comes in and does some creative, data analytics. And then looking at it, they realize, we've made this assumption based on, because you were talking about ages. So maybe we've made some assumptions based on the ages of data, and we're using those assumptions to target scholarship money. And in doing this analytics, we realize we're way off base. We have a substantial number of students who are of a different age. And so we need to modify the way we hand out scholarship money in order to better serve our students. So in that aspect, even though you don't necessarily have permission to use that data in a certain way, it would actually be better for your students if you did it. Does that make sense? So, and the reason I'm bringing that up as a theoretical example is, are there not examples of technologies that, we give them data without necessarily the intent of understanding how they might use it, but they end up using it in ways that are better for us in the long run?
Well, I mean, I think that you have to define what better is. And I want to go back to the GDPR thing. There's two aspects of that, I want to, at least highlight. Number one, if you're doing it within the business side, you can use that data however you want, as long as you're not getting it out to someone else. So like if my financial aid department decides that they're going to process the information differently for financial aid, they can continue to do that. And I know that wasn't the intent of the question. The other side of it is that we have to be careful, because GDPR does talk about automated decision making. that if you're making a decision based on, if a computer is making a decision, is highlighting, profiling, stereotyping, whatever, the data that is coming out of a system, then that does, in theory, fall under GDPR scope, that the users can decide they don't want that. That a person has to decide whether or not they, meet these requirements or whatever. But to that end, I think that the question is not whether or not you can take that data and you can go use it for a different purpose. That you say, okay, I've decided that there is a significant benefit of sending this data to this third-party processor. There's going to be, we're going to get this, we're going to help the students do this, we're going to have to do this. There's no restrictions on doing that, except for the fact you have to go tell the users, hey, we want to do it for this reason. Can we do it? And they have to say yes.
That's a pretty significant restriction.
Well, yes, it is. And I think that, in our current environment where that's all we've ever known, yes, that is a significant culture change. But for those organizations that already do that, that's not a big change for them. In the EU, they don't do that. They're already in the mode of not doing that. So they're like, okay, we can do that. We can interact with our users and get permission to do this. I would have loved the ability, several times at the university to say, don't send my data there. And, being the CISO, I don't really have a choice in the matter because they're going to send it. And that information is otherwise under the control of the university. So those are things that I have to think about. Do I want someone to say, yeah, I think I don't want my information sent to that organization for whatever reason. But the other side of it is, here's another one that I bring up. I hate cutting you off, Kevin, but there's another piece. I personally, as an individual, want to know where my data goes. Because if you're, how many people either in Slack or on the thing, they looked at Equifax and go, did I have information in Equifax? They didn't know.
Nobody should have asked that question. Everybody should have known that Equifax had all of their data. And if you don't know that Equifax is covering that, then you've never applied for a credit card or never opened up a bank account. Or
pick another one. Pick OPM. How many people were affected by OPM that never knew it?
I don't know anybody who didn't know they were affected by OPM that was paying attention. Again,
no, that's not true, because there were people in my family who didn't know that they were in the OPM records, because they're the ones who filled out the SF-86. I put them on there.
Right. No, I understand that you put them on there, but if they knew you worked with the government and didn't know they were part of that, then they're not paying attention.
I think that's a good point, though. Do Americans pay attention?
No, we don't. And this is so I want to. You've mentioned a bunch of things that I wanted to comment on. One of the big ones is you made the comment, well, if the company is keeping that data and using the data for the business, they're allowed to do that. GDPR doesn't stop them from doing it, except that in many cases, it is stopping them from doing it, because GDPR in many parts of it trigger upon a breach. And so I know lots of organizations that I've worked with, that I've talked to, that I've dealt with, that they are not doing certain things now because of the risk of a breach. Not that doing that causes more risk of a breach, but that if they collect that data and do something with it, and they have a breach that they don't control, which means that that's functionality they're never going to have. But that's where I go.
How other federal laws, other state laws, everything, they all have some sort of breach notification.
But they don't have a 20 million euro fine that's associated with that breach notification, right?
That's why the GDPR set it so high, is that it makes people think differently. Yes, you're right. They're not going to do something.
But it's not just making them think differently, it's making them not do things.
Well, that's their choice.
I totally understand it's their choice. So the government is stifling creativity. The government is stifling business. The government is stifling innovation, right? That's another way to phrase this.
And that's fine, and I understand it from the business point of view. I'm looking at it from the user's point of view.
No, but the user is now impacted by that business. Right.
Sure. So here's a good example of that. Did either of you guys watch Mark Zuckerberg's testimony between Congress?
I watched some of it.
Yeah, I watched some of it.
I think I was like one of 5 people that watched all of it because I was bored.
I'm so sorry.
I know.
But you were that bored, I have work for you.
There was something that I found interesting, and he repeated it several times, that, people thought that they were uncomfortable with targeted advertising. And they didn't like the fact that, they go and look at something over here on this website, and then they come back and they get ads for it on Facebook. But what they found out after studying and interviewing users was that they are more uncomfortable by getting untargeted advertising.
Yep.
And so they were able to use this data that the customer hadn't affirmatively consented to make the experience better. They were able to improve their product, and the customers liked it, even though they didn't think they would like it. So, I think that's maybe kind of an example of what you guys are disagreeing about is, I don't know that the consumer actually knows what they want.
Well, it's not just that the consumer doesn't know what they want. I believe that most consumers think they know what they want. Yeah, Nathan's finding out that he's being assigned all of this work now. The problem with doing a webcast, it's public, and hosting your boss. And also making the comment, well, I was so bored, I watched all the conversation. But this is one of those things where I believe that it sounds great to say we want to respect privacy and we want to get users to control their data. Users have regularly exhibited the fact that they don't pay attention anyways until somebody sticks a fork in them or puts some clickbait headline to get them to click something, right? We all hate net neutrality now. We hate the idea of not having net neutrality because Facebook told us we hate it and Wikipedia told us we hate it. Privacy wasn't a concern for the vast majority of people until Cambridge Analytica's pink-haired freak, and the pink hair part didn't make him a freak. He just, every time I've heard him speak, he sounds freaky to me. That he said Cambridge Analytica abused this stuff. We ignore the fact that it was abused for decades before this. It all boils down to this idea. There is innovation and stuff that we want to be able to do, that businesses want to be able to do. And I'm not arguing the idea that many businesses are going to screw the user in the name of making a profit, right? Absolutely. Secure Ideas is already planning on selling everybody's data who signed up for this webinar. Right? We're not really, maybe, but we are tracking you. Like this idea, and I think another example, like you said with the targeted advertising, Waze, the GPS app, right? How many people here use Waze, right? Out of the 3 of us, I do. I love it. And the reason I love it is I don't know where I am ever. I'm always lost. I'm lost in my office. And Waze gives me directions, but not only does Waze give me directions, it ties it to the idea of what's really happening in traffic, what's really happening in construction, and it reroutes me to the fastest way I can go, places I never even knew were possible to go, right? And when I started using Waze, not very many people used it in Jacksonville. And it's not because I'm a future thinker or some crap like that. I learned about it when I was out in California. It seemed neat, worked well out there. I kept using it over here. For the first 6 months that I used it, it gave me crap data, right? It gave me a route and that was it, because very few other people were doing it. So I willingly gave up my privacy for Waze to collect that data for 6 months every time I drove, with the hope that in the future I was going to get better data, right? Targeted ads. I like the fact that when I get an ad, there's actually a higher likelihood that it is something I want to see. It's something I'm interested in. And I'm willing to give up this fake idea of a right for privacy to get the benefit of having that data. And I am willing to penalize through my purchasing, my outspokenness, my platform, if you will, the companies that abuse that. And I do believe that overall, we are better off if we share data. That the good reason for it, genetics. If 23andMe opened up their genetics database to every cancer researcher out there, how much closer would we be to a cure? If Ancestry.com opened up their genetics database to every researcher out there, right? How much closer would we be to curing whatever, right? And I recognize the threat. I really believe I do.
What about solving crimes? Speaking of 23andMe, is that something, I'm curious what you guys both think. Is that something that the police should have unfettered access to that data to be able to investigate crimes?
I think the biggest concern with what you just said was unfettered. Yeah. Every time we make something an extreme, it's bad. And that's where I think the problem I have with GDPR is we've made it an extreme to protect privacy. You're now saying unfettered access. I would be okay with controlled access, right? We've accepted that with things like the FISA courts and whatever. I do believe that there is reasonableness to using that with oversight and what have you. And I'll let Johnathan answer the question as well. But my answer would be, I get the risk. I believe with some fetters, I made that up, access is okay.
So I'm going to disagree with you on the fact that I understand how let's say Waze, provides you a service. But if you're looking at it from the point of view of all Waze has to do to provide you that service is say, can we do that? And you click yes. But if I don't want them to provide that service to me, then it should be that default, no, you don't get to do this to me. You don't get to collect my information. You don't get to use my information. So, and I know you didn't mean it by this, but it almost seems like for those people who want all these services, they just want to be lazy and not check a box. Whereas I, on the other hand, I do want to not have that information out there. I don't want an organization to use my data without them saying, hey, we're going to do it like this, and like this.
May I ask one quick question? Sure. I don't mean to interrupt, but I want to ask a question is, using the Waze example, why are you using the app if you don't want them to track you?
I don't use the app. But that was the example. If you take Waze out of it and do some other service, let's say, the genetic stuff. The government probably has my genetics for whatever reason. And I don't want them to use it elsewhere. They have a purpose to use it whenever they took my blood and they were doing all their things. Great, more power to them. But I don't want them to give that out. But I also don't want it to be, well, we're going to go ahead and do it unless you tell me no. Instead, I want it to be, no, you're not going to do it unless I say, yeah, you can go ahead and release all my information out to the world and, let the chips fall where they may. In terms of the DNA, you're absolutely right. For research, great. For crime, sure, with a warrant. It's I've got some experience in law enforcement, and I am not law enforcement. It's not my job to make it easier for law enforcement to do their job. And even on the law enforcement side, they believe that. They might argue with you on that, but they truly do believe that, if they're going to come in and get information, they need a warrant. They need to get a judge to sign off on it and say, hey, I'm going to go get this. Yep. Now, does that cause problems? Absolutely. It absolutely does. Does it cause where some people may get off or may go to jail? Yes, it does. I understand that. But it's still, for me and for a lot of people, I still want to have that protection. I still want to have that right to say, no, you don't get to do this. You don't get to come into my house without a warrant. You don't get to take, my bio information without a proper approved request from either a judge or a grand jury or whatever. And I think that is the same way across the board. Now, for GDPR, there are exceptions for, whether it be law enforcement or for public good and things like that. So, they did write that in there just because there are things that override even personal privacy. Whether it be, and I don't want to say, a national, emergency or anything like that, even to the effect of, let's say they had an outbreak of a disease and they're trying to figure it out, and they can go and they can get the information they need to because it's in the public interest. So they wrote that in there, and I support that. But for general use, for general organizations use, for general, commercial use, I think that there should be. I am a privacy person. I like to have that privacy. That's why I am not on Facebook. And, I have LinkedIn for professional reasons, but most of the information, all the information is on there is public professional information, not anything private to me.
Right. But every one of the examples you gave, except for the government, is you making a choice to give data to an organization that you don't have to give data to. And as far as I know, the government isn't affected at all by GDPR, that they are exempted from that type of enforcement. And so the OPM breach, even if it had European Union people in it, would have had no impact on the government.
That's left to be determined. No one has really decided that yet. Because we do have EU citizens in soldiers and such. I agree with you, but let's take an employment. I have to give my information to my employer.
Yes. How
they use that right now, they can do whatever they want with it.
I disagree.
But I've seen it. I
don't have the ability to do whatever I want with my employees' data. I may do whatever I want, but I'm violating laws and contracts and whatever if I'm doing certain things. GDPR did not change that.
You're right. GDPR won't change it, except for EU citizens and EU companies. It does change it for them where they decide, you cannot start monitoring your employees in the EU without their permission. So you can't put surveillance cameras up because, you just want to watch your employees. You can't just go take their data and go dump it out to a third party because you just decide you want to do that.
Right. But if you ask your employees, and I'll pick on Nathan here, right? Nathan obviously has tons of free time on his hands. He doesn't do much because he's watching Mark Zuckerberg. If I say to Nathan, I want to monitor all the traffic on your machine, which my understanding is I have to ask him permission if he was an EU citizen, right?
But here's the thing. In the EU or in the GDPR, just the fact that you ask him and he says yes doesn't mean he's given you consent. The DPA has to approve it because they do not feel like it is possible for an employer and employee relationship to give true consent. So even though you may want to do it and you ask him, can I do this? You still have to go get approved by your DPA to do it first. And they will decide, we don't like that. That's not going to be private for him. We're not going to let you do that.
Right. Which means that the idea that he doesn't have the ability to consent makes sense to me because he has a choice. If I say, Nathan, I want to monitor your shit, and he says no, it's very easy for me to say, Nathan, I really appreciate all the time you worked with us. Go away. Right? So you're right? It's the same thing, with lots of things. The problem is you now restrict my ability as an organization to meet my contractual requirements with my customers that say that I'm going to protect their data on Nathan's machine. Mm-hmm. So again, you've passed a law that is impossible for me to truly meet the requirements. And so what we have is a nod to privacy to get people to leave us alone, a great way to make lots and lots of money for compliance organizations, sign makers in California, and yet we've not actually solved the problem. And I think you personally hit it on the head earlier when you said the best way to protect the privacy is to protect from harm, right? If we remove the harm, and I'm not saying, contrary to what was said, I'm not saying, okay, now every bit of conversation should be 100% public. I believe that there are certain things that we absolutely should keep confidential. There are things we agree contractually to keep confidential. When we start to say that foundational data has to be confidential from any possibility of breach, and we have these huge fines, we go back to the idea that we're not truly going to protect people. All we're going to do is remove functionality. And so I know that we're at one, so that's the last thing I'm going to say, and I'll let you end it out.
No. But one of the things that, I think it's kind of the difference is, I think GDPR's intent here has very little to do with security. Because I truly believe that privacy, compliance, and security are all three separate things. They might have some overlap in some Venn diagram, but they're actually separate things. In my world, it's not about, can I keep this data secure? It's, I don't want the data. I don't want that data in our system, so I don't have to keep it secure. I'm not going to ask for that data. I'm not going to store that data. And I think that's kind of the intent of the GDPR. Of the privacy professionals that I've talked to and I've interacted with, that was that overshadowing concept of, don't have the data. You don't need to have sexual preference. You don't need to have race. You don't need to have, their date of birth, social security number, unless you absolutely have it. And that absolutely have is based off of, what someone else, a third party, is like, yeah, you really do need this for business need, go for it. Or no, you really don't need to have that. Don't store that.
So I have to argue with you from one perspective. This weekend, I was playing with my son out in the yard, and he wanted to build something. I said, what do you want to build? And he's like, I don't know. What do we have to build with? And we started looking around, and it's like we found part of an old pallet, and we found some boards over here, and we found some string. And he wanted to build something, but he didn't know what it was. So we started looking at what he had. He threw stuff together. Pretty soon we have this pulley going up over a tree, and we've got the tent that's suspended on part of a pallet. And I mean, it was, I don't know. Somebody's probably going to get hurt in my backyard. But the point was, he made some pretty cool stuff once he had something to build with. And I think we see that. I mean, we see that with Facebook. A lot of the ways that Facebook is being used were never imagined 10 or 15 years ago. And it's because they've collected this data and they've said, okay, we have this. What can we do with it? And they come out with things that are valuable to society. So saying you don't need that, so you can't use it or you can't keep it, that is limiting development. That is limiting business.
It is.
And if I may, I know I said I wouldn't say anything else, but there's something that popped up when you said, because I always forget that race is one of those things that is protected from a perspective of, I don't really think about it. And I know that, it's just not right. But we had an employee sign up and get hired by us, and they filled out the whole documentation. And one of the checkboxes is, what race are you, right? And I've never thought about it. That was our HR company that put the paperwork together, and they didn't check a box. They didn't check anything. No, they did. I'm sorry. There's a not disclosed or whatever, right? Like
or whatever, right?
Yeah. And they checked that box. And I don't want to disclose this. I don't want to tell you what race I am. And they submitted it, and we sent it over to the HR company. We were using a PO that sucked. In case you're wondering, it was Insperity. Don't use them. It's just like, don't buy check marks. But so Nathan, you're waiting for it. We got a form that is a U.S. government form that we were required by law to fill out that said observable race. And we weren't allowed to tell them we were filling this form. The documentation was like, do not tell the employee you filled this form out. So they're not an employee anymore, so I'm not telling them. And it was like, why do I have to fill this out? They don't want to answer it. I don't care. I have no business reason to know that Nathan is actually 97% Native American. I made that up. He lives in Oklahoma. He must be Native American. And
we're all at least 1%.
Yeah, what is that senator's name? But we didn't want to collect the data. We had no interest in the data. We had no business reason for the data, yet we were forced by the law to collect it, right? Now,
well, now hold on.
To Europe.
You collected it. How did you collect it? Did you store it?
We filled out a form that we handed to our HR company. It became part of the record for the employee.
Did you have to do that?
Yes, we were required by law to send that form in.
To send it into who?
It had to go back to the HR company to submit as part of the package.
But does it have?
It was a third-party HR company, right?
Okay, so I can't answer why or how or what the solution is to that one. My question, if that happened here at the university, would be, all right, if they're requesting us to do this and they're telling us we cannot tell the user, immediately I'd give it to my legal team and say, hey, you guys need to decide what our response is.
Yep.
But, at that point, I need to look at it as like, are we going to store it? We are providing information, and it may not be correct information. We may fill that out and be completely wrong. Absolutely. We fill out some information and we send a form in, but we are not storing it. As an example, we would not store it in any way, shape, or form. So at that point, would we fall under being a controller or a processor, or are we just, giving someone an opinion on something? I think that those are very in the weeds type questions. But I think you're absolutely right. Those sorts of things are going to come out. But here's the thing. I am willing to engage in those conversations, and I'm willing, at least from the university's perspective, I'm willing to challenge it, to question it, to say, I do want to do better. I do want my organization to do better. And I do want to do what we need to do to protect the privacy of the information of our individuals. And I think that most privacy people, most security people would more or less want the same thing. I would hope they would want the same thing, because that's kind of what we do in security, is we help protect people. So, I'm going to use the GDPR as a tool. I believe, and everyone has told us in terms of our legal, that we will fall under GDPR. That's why I put so much effort into this. So we're going to abide by it. But just like any other compliance out there, it's a tool for us to get better. If we were all completely 100% secure, we wouldn't have to worry about compliances or meeting compliances. We would just automatically meet them. But then you guys wouldn't have jobs because we're already 100% secure. Now, I would love to be completely ISO or completely NIST. That's not ever going to happen. But I could say, every time we meet in compliance, we get better. It's like, oh yeah, we got to focus on this. All right, yep, let's do this. Let's get better. Let's get better. Let's get better. And GDPR is just one of those tools that I'm going to utilize here at the university or wherever I go to do that. Because I think it gives enough bite that people take notice of it. It gives us enough resources in terms of people thinking about it to go, maybe we should think differently about this. Maybe we shouldn't collect this information. Maybe the benefit we get out of this justifies us going and asking the users, hey, we want to provide this benefit. Will you check this box for us? And the users are going to go, hey, you know what? That I get a lot of benefit out of that. Yes, absolutely. And for those old crotchety people like me who don't want that, we're going to go, nope, I'm not going to sign that in any way, shape, or form. And I know we went over time, and I apologize for that.
Yeah, no, it's all good. I kind of let it run a little bit because we were having a good conversation. But I'm going to go ahead and just kind of finish it up. I guess one last thing. Do you guys have a last comment or a final takeaway on your thoughts on privacy, on what people should keep in mind?
I personally think that we should do more to help prevent the harm of lack of privacy.
I like the sound of that. I also want to just say that people need to stop giving up their own personal responsibility. Yep. You are responsible for what you give. You are responsible for protecting yourself. Do it.
Very good.
Yep.
Google Home or bust. Yeah, whatever. We've all got Alexas. Actually, I had to unplug mine so it didn't jump in. There you go. All right. Well, thank you guys for your time. Thank everybody else, the participants. I really appreciated all the chat back and forth. Just so everybody knows, that professionally evil Slack team, that doesn't have a close date. We leave that open all the time, so people can chat all the time. There's a bunch of random security folks that hang out in there in other channels. So we'd love to have you join us. If you're watching this on YouTube, check secureideas.com/classes. See if we're still doing these. We'd love to have you participate in the next one. So with that, I'll go ahead and stop the recording. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks
By the
all.
way, it's Black Hat.
What's Black Hat?
It's been driving me crazy this entire webcast. You misspelled Black Hat on the slide.
Nice. Technically, I misspelled DEF CON too, right? Because DEF CON is always capitalized.
Yep. And I've been sitting here and I'm like, okay, I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say it.
Nice. Sorry about that. I will fix that for the next one. Yeah.